There is something ancient in the breath of the planet. It moves through forests and oceans, through soil and bone, through the lungs of every living thing and the quiet stillness of rock. It is carbon, not just an element, but a soft pulse that hums beneath all life. You can almost feel it if you sit long enough under the trees. The air carries it in exhaled sighs and blooming leaves. The soil holds it in sleeping roots and fallen branches. The sky wears it like a veil, invisible and endless. The carbon cycle is not a machine. It is a dance, delicate and slow, that has been moving since the dawn of breath. Long ago, before there were animals or trees, the earth breathed carbon in different ways. Volcanoes, wild and molten, exhaled it in great clouds that drifted into the young sky. Oceans pulled it down like lullabies, tucking it into their deep beds of water. The early microbes, tiny architects of balance, began to fold it into their own bodies. And so, carbon became the great traveler, moving from stone to stream, from sunlight to cell. It never settled in one place. It learned to move, to flow, to return. Now imagine a forest at dawn. Mist clings to the canopy. A deer steps through ferns that are still wet with night. Above, the leaves are already beginning their daily work, pulling carbon from the air, folding it into sugars, breathing out soft oxygen. This quiet exchange between leaf and light is photosynthesis. It is one of nature's most elegant spells. With it, carbon from the sky becomes part of the tree, part of the bark, the root, the fruit. Later, when the leaf falls or the tree dies, that carbon doesn't disappear. It slips into the soil, into fungi, into the bellies of insects. It continues its journey, never gone, only changing. Beneath our feet, in the damp cradle of soil, carbon sleeps. It lives in the compost of 1,000 summers. It curls inside the skeletons of fallen creatures and the broken wings of long-gone birds. Worms stir it gently. Microbes feast upon it. Roots drink it in slow gulps. This is not decay, it is continuation. It is the quiet turning of yesterday into tomorrow. The ground is not merely dirt, it is memory. Even the oceans whisper carbon stories. Waves take it from the sky, where it dissolves into salt and motion. Plankton, the tiny wanderers of the sea, draw it in to build their shells, small and intricate like snowflakes. When they die, their shells drift down like a slow rain, carrying carbon with them to the deep. There it settles for centuries, maybe longer, pressed into silence and stone. The sea holds more carbon than the sky ever could. It is the great keeper, absorbing, storing, and releasing when the rhythm calls for it. Animals, too, are part of this gentle loop. When you breathe out, a bit of carbon leaves your lungs, a trace of the food you ate, the air you breathed, the memories you made. That breath may feed a tree or drift into a cloud or settle on a mountain. Every movement, every meal, every heartbeat sends carbon onward. You are part of the pattern, not separate from it, held by it. And then there is fire. When a log burns, when a candle flickers, when fossil fuel meets spark, carbon is released in a rush of light and warmth. It returns to the sky not as punishment but as return. This, too, is part of the cycle. But when the fire grows too fast, when we burn more than nature can balance, the cycle begins to stumble. The sky thickens. The earth warms. The breath of the planet becomes heavy. Yet still the cycle remembers. Forests grow. Oceans stir. Soil listens. The carbon that moves through us all is ancient but not tired. It waits in tree rings and coral reefs, in limestone cliffs and butterfly wings. It is the quiet storyteller of Earth, connecting past and present, life and stone, sky and root. Now picture yourself lying in a field beneath a wide blue sky. The wind moves across your skin. The sun touches your face. You breathe in, you breathe out. With each breath, you are in conversation with the world. You are receiving what the trees offer and offering what they need. The balance is older than cities, older than language. It is the breath of earth and sky, and you are inside it always. Let's drift deeper into the places where carbon hides, not just in the open sky or the waving branches of trees, but in the quiet in-between spaces, where transformation hums beneath the surface. Think of the wetlands, those soft, breathing lands where water meets soil in a perpetual embrace. Beneath the still water, under tangled reeds and whispering grasses, carbon gathers like a secret. Dead plants fall into the water and sink, not quite rotting, not quite remaining. In this oxygen-poor hush, decomposition slows and the carbon inside the leaves and stems becomes locked away. Over centuries, these places become rich vaults of carbon, peatlands, marshes, swamps. And though they appear gentle, their power to hold the Earth's breath is immense. Further underground, deeper than roots dare stretch, carbon rests as coal, oil, and natural gas. These are not just fuels, they are the condensed memory of ancient worlds. Forests that once rustled with creatures, oceans once teeming with microscopic life, now sleep beneath our feet as black rock and thick liquid. It took millions of years for this carbon to be pressed into silence. And in the last blink of human history, we have pulled it back to the surface and sent it rushing into the sky. This unbalancing, this sudden return of stored breath, is the great challenge of our age. But understanding the cycle is the first gentle step back toward balance. Consider now the bodies of living things. Your bones are built on carbon, your muscles, your breath, your thoughts all carry it. A plant takes carbon from the air, forms a seed, and that seed becomes part of a fruit. You eat the fruit and the carbon becomes part of your story. You speak, move, dream, and that carbon flows with you. It leaves you an exhale in movement and touch. The carbon within us is not fixed. It is borrowed. And when our time ends, that carbon will return to air, to soil, to root. The cycle depends on sharing. Trees cannot live without air. Air cannot hold its form without oceans. Oceans cannot stir without warmth. Warmth cannot exist without energy. And energy travels on carbon back. In one way or another, life is simply the choreography of carbon, a slow, graceful turning of form into form, never wasted, only reimagined. Imagine an old-growth forest, untouched by axes or roads. In this cathedral of green, each fallen tree is a bridge between life and decay. Moss climbs the trunks. Fungi lace the roots with delicate threads. These fungi, the mycorrhizal networks, are carbon's underground travelers. They move it from tree to tree, from root to root, in a system so vast and complex, scientists are still learning how deeply connected it is. A dying tree may offer its last breath of carbon to a seedling nearby, helping it grow strong. This generosity is built into the system. It is how the forest breathes as one. Carbon does not care for borders or nations. It flows through tundra and tropics, from coral reefs to cattle fields, from mountain glaciers to city skylines. Even in the quiet night of the desert, carbon shifts, drawn from the breath of a cactus, the dust of the soil, the bones of a lizard curled in shade. It does not move in haste. It does not announce itself, but it moves always. There is a rhythm in the atmosphere, too. As seasons pass, the Earth's breath changes. In spring and summer, when plants flourish in the northern hemisphere, more carbon is drawn down from the sky. The air becomes lighter, as if the planet is inhaling. In autumn and winter, when leaves fall and plants rest, some of that carbon is released again, a soft exhale. This gentle breathing is visible in the graphs and data of scientists, but it is also something you can feel if you know how to listen. It is the pulse of Earth's lungs. In the far north, where ice once held the world in its grasp, permafrost lies beneath the moss and lichen. This frozen Earth is not lifeless, it is a sleeping archive. Trapped inside it are centuries of plant matter, animal remains, and their carbon. But as the world warms, the permafrost softens and its contents begin to stir. Carbon long locked away begins to rise once more. It is not malevolent. It is not a warning. It is simply nature responding to change, quietly, persistently. Even cities, those concrete jungles of steel and glass, are woven into the carbon cycle. Cars and factories breathe out. Parks and green rooftops breathe in. People move, cook, write, dream, and with each act the carbon flows. Though it may seem distant in traffic and neon lights, the cycle does not break. It simply shifts. It adapts. And so the cycle continues, unseen but unceasing. From a whale's breath to a grain of pollen, from a child's laugh to a volcanic plume, carbon dances. Sometimes it pauses, settling into soil or stone. Sometimes it rushes, carried by fire or wind. But always it returns. It is not a burden. It is a bond. The breath of earth and sky is not just an idea. It is a real, living rhythm older than language, deeper than culture. It invites us to notice, to wonder, to be gentle, because the carbon within us is not separate from the world. It is the world, shared with us for a while. And when we understand that, truly feel it, we might begin to live in better harmony, not as owners, but as participants in the most elegant cycle nature has ever written. Now let us follow carbon as it completes its slow return, drifting once more from form to form, bringing the breath of past life into tomorrow's seed. Imagine the stillness of twilight over a meadow. The light softens, insects hum, leaves rustle under the weight of memory. Beneath your feet the soil is not quiet, it moves gently, invisibly. Worms turn tunnels through the dark. Fungi stretch their threads wider. Bacteria, countless and unseen, feed on the remains of things once green and reaching. And with every bite, every whisper of decay, carbon is passed on from root to root, from dust to dew. This, too, is life. This is the closing note of one form and the quiet beginning of another. Some of this carbon, once part of leaf or lung, will remain close, inside a tree's growing ring or a seed's small weight. But some will rise. It will return to the air, carried by wind, by warmth, by breath, and it will become part of something new, a cloud perhaps, or a berry, or a bird. Carbon does not linger in sorrow or celebration. It continues, always. When a tree lives 100 years and finally falls, its carbon begins a patient transformation. Not a vanishing, but a changing. Bark softens, beetles arrive, mosses drape across the trunk like memory. Bit by bit, season by season, the tree becomes soil, becomes nourishment, becomes the breath of saplings nearby. Nothing is wasted, nothing is truly lost. The forest knows this. The forest remembers. Even fire, which seems so final, is part of this story. In a lightning-struck grove, flames climb trunks and sweep the forest floor. Carbon is released in clouds that rise into the sky, but soon from the blackened earth new shoots appear. Some seeds only open after fire, some trees depend on the heat to renew, and the carbon released now may feed the growth of tomorrow's canopy. The balance, though shaken, finds its rhythm again. Nature does not end in fire, it begins there too. We sometimes forget this cycle because it moves slowly, not in the blink of a screen or the hum of a car, but in the patient rhythm of seasons, of soil, of stone. But it is always there. In every breath we take, in every meal, every step, carbon travels with us. It came from a star long before Earth had trees or oceans. It wandered through space, through ash, through water. And now it is in your chest, part of the breath you just released. The atoms of you once belonged to a fern, a fish, a mountain, a moth. They will belong to something else again. Somewhere in the ocean, a whale dives deep. Its breath, rich with carbon, bubbles upward, meets the surface, and spreads into the air. That same carbon may drift across the world, fall into a rainforest, and be caught by the open mouth of a flower. Inside that flower, it may form nectar, be sipped by a hummingbird, and carried into the song it sings. You will never see it, but it's real, this long, poetic exchange. It's the story of life breathing itself forward endlessly. There are quiet places that hold great amounts of carbon, seagrass meadows, mangroves, tidal marshes. These blue carbon ecosystems are gentle warriors of balance. They store more carbon per acre than most forests, locking it away in sediments and roots that are undisturbed for centuries. When these places are protected, they do their work quietly and well. But when they are disturbed, when the grasses are torn or the waters polluted, that stored carbon escapes, not in anger, but in the simple way of imbalance. The breath becomes uneven. The rhythm falters. And yet there is always a path back. When forests are replanted, when wetlands are restored, when soil is tended with care, the cycle begins to repair itself. Slowly, gently, trees begin to draw down carbon again. Soil begins to hold memory once more. Oceans begin to breathe a little easier. We cannot stop the cycle, but we can choose how we move within it, with care or with disregard, with reverence or with haste. Our ancestors burned fires not knowing what carbon was. They watched smoke curl into stars and felt warmth in winter. Now we know more. We understand how carbon connects us to everything, to the mushrooms in the forest and the clouds over the ocean, to the stone under the mountain and the marrow in our bones. This knowledge is not a burden. It is a gift. It invites us to be part of the story, not just as users of breath, but as protectors of it. Close your eyes and picture a world where the carbon cycle moves in harmony again, where forests stand tall, oceans sparkle with life, soil is rich and soft, and air is clean and light, where children run beneath trees that will outlive them and the carbon in their breath returns to the leaves above them. This is not a fantasy. It is possible. Nature has done it before. It remembers the way. And so we return to where we began, to breath, yours, mine, the world. Every inhale connects us to trees, to oceans, to animals we'll never meet and stars we'll never see. Every exhale gives something back. The carbon within us is not ours to keep. It is ours to carry gently for a while. The breath of earth and sky continues, whether we notice it or not. But when we do notice, when we feel it move through our lungs, through the wind, through the green of every growing thing, we become part of something larger, something older, something beautifully alive. And in that knowing there is peace. In that knowing we find our place, quiet, necessary, shared. Beneath the forest floor, hidden from sight, lies a network more ancient than language, more delicate than any machine. It pulses with intention, though it speaks no words. It carries messages not in sound, but in sugars and scents, in carbon and cooperation. This is the secret life of roots, a vast underground system of connection where carbon flows not just as energy, but as conversation. Trees, grasses, and even flowers tap into this living web, exchanging nutrients and stories through tendrils of life that stretch across the soil. And at the center of it all is carbon, the quiet courier of the forest's wisdom. Imagine a sapling in a shaded wood, thin and trembling, its leaves too few to catch enough light, its roots barely holding onto the earth. Alone it would struggle, but it is not alone. Deep underground, older trees sense its hunger. Through root and mycorrhizal fungi, those thread-like filaments that lace the earth, they send carbon-rich sugars to the young one. This is not charity. It is balance. The forest knows that for it to survive, the many must care for the few. And carbon, drawn from air by the strong, becomes nourishment for the weak. These fungal threads, thinner than a human hair, connect root to root across wide distances. Some belong to a single species of tree. Others form links between many kinds, weaving maple to birch, fir to cedar. The fungi receive sugars, carbon compounds created by trees through photosynthesis, and in return they offer water, minerals, and protection against disease. But this relationship is more than barter. It is community. Trees that are sick or dying may send their remaining carbon to their neighbors. Trees under insect attack may signal danger through the network, triggering chemical defenses in those nearby. Carbon becomes both sustenance and signal, the language of the living ground. There is something astonishing in knowing that forests are not just collections of trees, but families with elders and infants, with memory and intent. In one Canadian forest, scientists found that the oldest, tallest trees, dubbed mother trees, serve as hubs in the carbon network. Their deep roots connect to dozens, even hundreds of other trees. They sense which saplings are their kin and favor them, channeling more carbon their way. When a mother tree is cut down, the surrounding forest suffers. The wisdom and the carbon it carried begins to fade. Step into a field of grasses, and a similar story unfolds. Though smaller and faster-lived than trees, grasses also use underground networks to share carbon and signals. In drought, some grasses release carbon compounds that alert their neighbors to prepare for dryness. In times of plenty, they spread their sugars outward, encouraging root growth and microbial collaboration. The soil beneath a prairie is a living, breathing world, carbon moving not just vertically, from sky to root, but laterally from root to root, from life to life. Even in deserts, where rain is rare and life clings tight to shade, roots find ways to speak. Cacti and desert shrubs form alliances with fungi that help them draw in the faintest traces of moisture. In return, they send small streams of carbon, a thank you for survival. Here, the network is slower, sparser, but no less alive. In the harshest conditions, carbon still flows, still connects, still speaks. Carbon stored in roots does not simply sit. It fuels the hidden half of the plant's life, the growing of fine root hairs, the sending of chemical signals, the shaping of soil itself. Around each root tip is a region called the rhizosphere, a tiny halo of life where carbon feeds bacteria, fungi, and other microbes. This microscopic crowd breaks down minerals, wards off disease, and helps plants grow strong. Without this carbon-fed community, roots would falter, the plant would weaken, and the forest would begin to lose its voice. When animals pass through, a fox nosing in the undergrowth, a boar digging for grubs, they disturb the soil, and with it, the web of carbon communication. But often this is not destruction. It is renewal. Soil shifts, new spaces open, roots adjust. The carbon threads reroute, like a soft electric grid of life. Each movement, each breath, is a chance for carbon to find a new path. And then there are the dead. A fallen leaf, a broken branch, a tree brought down by age or storm all return to the soil. Decomposers arrive, beetles, fungi, bacteria. They break down the plant's body and release its carbon into the ground. Some of it is taken up by nearby roots. Some flows through the fungal threads. Some becomes part of the soil, dark and rich and ready. Nothing is wasted. The carbon that once lifted leaves to the sun now feeds the hidden network below. Life above and below is stitched together by this shared breath. You might never see this network, never feel the soft push of carbon from one root to another. But it is there, under every forest, every meadow, every garden. It moves slowly, patiently, carefully, a language written in sugars and signals, in threads too fine to see. It is a story of cooperation, of resilience, of care. And at the heart of that story is carbon, the messenger of the living earth. As you walk through a forest path or across a grassy hill, remember that beneath your steps is a web of connection so vast and so quiet, it has shaped the world for millions of years. The roots beneath you are not silent. They are speaking, listening, sharing. And in every conversation, carbon is the ink, the breath, the bridge. Let us wander deeper now into the soil itself, where light never reaches but life thrives in intricate, unseen dances. Here in the dark, carbon takes on its most secret role, not as air or leaf or trunk, but as lifeblood for a silent community. Imagine the ground beneath a tree not as solid, but as porous and alive. Tunnels spiral through it, built by worms, by insects, by the slow burrowings of roots. Around these tunnels swirl microbial worlds, tiny civilizations feeding, reproducing, dying, and beginning again. Carbon flows through all of them, not in grand rivers but in gentle exchanges, molecule by molecule, cell by cell. It is the quietest orchestra, and yet the most essential. When a root releases a bit of sugar, a simple carbon chain shaped by the sun, it is not lost. It is a signal, a gift. Microbes in the soil rush toward it, drawn by invisible currents of scent and need. In exchange, they offer minerals, nitrogen, defense against harmful invaders. This transaction happens billions of times each day, under every tree, in every patch of soil where life holds ground. What we walk upon is not mere dirt. It is a breathing archive, where carbon feeds the past into the present. Deeper still, carbon begins to sink into forms more stable, more permanent. Not all carbon in soil is easily moved. Some becomes trapped in the clinging arms of clay, held tightly against erosion and loss. This stable soil carbon can remain for centuries, even millennia, shaping the fertility of a landscape long after its forests have changed. It is a memory written not in words but in molecules, a record of leaf and rain and root pressed into the architecture of the earth. But this memory can be fragile. When soil is disturbed by plow, by drought, by heavy foot or tire, the delicate balance shatters. Microbes that once lived in harmony may lose their food. Fungi may break their networks. Carbon that had slept peacefully may awaken and rise again into the air as carbon dioxide. The soil exhales too quickly and the balance shifts. Yet where there is care, when forests are left to grow, when fields are tended with patience, when wetlands are restored, the soil begins to inhale once more. It draws carbon back into its deep spaces, reweaving the underground web that holds the world. This quiet process of drawing carbon down into soil is called sequestration, and though it is not dramatic, not loud, it is one of the most powerful allies in the Earth's quest for balance. A thriving prairie, with roots that dive meters below the surface, can pull and hold more carbon than many forests. A healthy pasture, when grazed gently and rotated wisely, can rebuild the microbial symphony beneath it. A garden rich with compost and undisturbed beds becomes a small but potent breath of healing. Every root matters. Every exchange counts. Think now of the trees that live for centuries, oaks and redwoods, baobabs and beeches. Their roots, massive and winding, are not just anchors against the wind. They are lifelines feeding and being fed, connected to generations of fungi and soil dwellers. When such a tree falls, it does not disappear. It becomes a new center of carbon flow. Its roots decay slowly, nourishing the land for years to come. New shoots rise near it, growing from the memory of its life. In this way, carbon teaches us that even the end of one form is the beginning of another. Animals, too, play their part. A rabbit digging a burrow stirs the soil. A deer's hooves press leaves into the ground. An earthworm consumes organic matter and casts it deeper into the soil's core. Even the smallest motion has meaning. And every motion moves carbon from leaf to soil, from root to microbe, from air to breath to humus. The cycle turns, not with thunder but with the softness of daily life. In places where forests have vanished, where the soil lies bare and broken, the absence of carbon is not just chemical, it is emotional. The land feels hollow, as though its story has been interrupted. But the beauty of carbon is that it can return, with time, with care, with attention to what lives beneath as much as what grows above. Replanting a tree, restoring a native grass, feeding soil with fallen leaves, these are not small acts. They are invitations for carbon to come home. And in some places, the return is breathtaking. On abandoned farmland left alone for a few decades, grasses and shrubs begin to grow. Roots stretch down. Soil darkens with organic matter. The carbon that was once released slowly seeps back, caught in root and fungi and clay. Birds return. Insects arrive. The story of the land begins again. This is not magic. It is biology, chemistry, patience. The same rules that let carbon wander also allow it to return. Across the world, indigenous communities have long understood the dialogue between root and soil, carbon and care. Their practices of low-till farming, of composting, of planting in cycles are not relics of the past. They are blueprints for the future. To listen to the earth is to honor its breath. To care for the soil is to speak carbon's language fluently. And perhaps in the end, this is what the roots have always known. That connection, not competition, is the path to life. That generosity of carbon, of signal, of space makes the forest thrive. That every living thing, above and below, plays a part in the great exchange. In the forest, no root grows alone. No breath is taken without offering something in return. So when you kneel in a garden or walk a trail through old woods, remember the living web beneath you. Know that every step echoes into the earth, and within that echo, carbon listens. It moves. It speaks. It invites you to be part of the cycle, not just as witness, but as participant, as caretaker, as one who understands the quiet language of roots. Let us return to the forest now in the hush of morning, where dew clings to every leaf and the sun rises soft between branches. Beneath the silence, beneath the roots and soil and stones, the carbon cycle continues, steady, unseen, essential. It moves through time as much as space, connecting today's breath with yesterday's decay. And in this final arc of the story, we follow carbon into its most lasting forms, where it no longer races from leaf to sky, but settles, waits, and becomes legacy. When a root dies, it leaves behind more than a hollow. It leaves memory. Bits of carbon once built into its form are slowly released, some to the microbes who feed on its remains, some to the soil particles that hold them like treasure, and some to the air where they rejoin the great invisible sky river of carbon dioxide. But not all of it leaves. Some carbon remains behind, woven into the soil's dark texture, becoming humus, rich, stable, and nourishing. This is not fast carbon. It is the quiet kind, the kind that may stay for decades, even centuries, holding the Earth's breath in place. In some soils, especially those under old forests or undisturbed prairies, this stable carbon is layered deep like pages of an ancient book. Each layer tells a story, of flood or fire, of dry seasons and lush ones, of forests that grew and fell and grew again. Carbon is not just a chemical. It is a historian. It records the rise and fall of ecosystems, the presence of animals long vanished, the generosity of roots that gave more than they took. In the slow dark of the earth, it becomes witness. Sometimes when we walk across a forest floor or press seeds into the ground, we forget that we're treading on time. We forget that beneath our feet are the carbon traces of lives we'll never know. But the plants remember. The roots remember. When a seed sprouts, it sends down a root not into empty earth but into a world already alive with memory. The soil whispers to it, "Here are nutrients, here is moisture, here is space." And wrapped in those gifts is carbon, carried by unseen threads, shaped by those who came before. As the plant grows, it lifts that carbon into the air again, into leaf, into flower, into fruit. Perhaps an animal eats the fruit. Perhaps it falls and rots, feeding soil anew. Perhaps it becomes a seed again. And in each of those choices, carbon moves, not randomly but with rhythm, not with force but with grace. In boreal forests and tropical jungles, in tundra and savanna, carbon binds life together, not just within species but across them. A root's carbon can become a beetle's body. That beetle may be eaten by a bird who migrates across an ocean. The carbon travels with it. It may fall with a feather, rest in a tide pool, be caught by algae, and return to the cycle once more. These transformations are not poetic inventions. They are real, measurable, and constant. The world breathes because of them. In some rare places, carbon is locked away for eons. A tree may fall into a swamp, sink into silt, and over millennia become coal. Or a tiny marine creature may settle on the ocean floor, its carbon shell joining others to form limestone. These are the long sleeps of carbon, the deep rests. They are not gone, only paused. And when we dig them up, when we burn them to fuel our lives, we release not just energy but ancient breath. The challenge of our time is to balance this sudden exhale, to listen to the cycle, and let it find its rhythm again. But the roots still speak. In cities where sidewalks crack and green breaks through concrete, roots stretch into unlikely places. They find pockets of soil, cracks of possibility, and begin again. Carbon moves into their growing tips, fueling expansion, reaching toward nutrients, anchoring hope. In rooftop gardens and rewilded spaces, in backyard compost heaps and roadside plantings, the cycle is alive. Even when unseen, it works. Farmers who plant cover crops, who feed the soil with organic matter, who avoid overtilling, are writing new chapters in the carbon story. Forest stewards who allow natural growth, who protect ancient groves, who understand the silent networks beneath the canopy, are helping the roots speak louder. Citizens who plant trees, who care for their soil, who honor the slowness of nature's pace, they too become part of the dialogue. And in schools, in laboratories, in quiet field stations nestled at the edges of wild lands, scientists trace the paths of carbon. They follow molecules from air to leaf, from root to microbe. They watch as a single root hair feeds a colony of bacteria, as a fungal strand carries sugar across meters of soil. They map these movements with tools and data, but behind the numbers is something softer: awe, reverence, the realization that we live in a world more connected than we ever dreamed. As we finish this story, picture a forest once more. The sun filters through leaves, the air is clean, the soil is rich, soft, dark. Beneath it, roots move and breathe gently, fungi stretch their threads, carbon flows slowly, carefully, and above, in every leaf, the sky is caught and transformed. The tree breathes in what we release. We breathe in what it gives. This is not just balance. It is relationship. It is trust. To listen to the roots is to understand time differently. It is to feel the weight and grace of every breath. It is to know that carbon connects us all, not just to each other, but to every living thing that ever was or will be. In the hush beneath the forest, in the weave of soil and life, in the deep silence where roots speak with carbon, the earth is telling us something gentle and true. We are part of the cycle, and the cycle is sacred. Drift now toward the water's edge, where the sky meets the sea in a line so thin it could be breath. The surface of the ocean shimmers like a giant lung, rising and falling in slow rhythm, as if the planet itself were exhaling. But beneath that surface lies one of Earth's quietest miracles, an invisible exchange that never stops. Here, carbon moves not with footsteps or roots, but with waves, with salt, with life so small it cannot be seen. The ocean does not speak loudly, but it holds more carbon than the land and air combined. And it holds it not in chains or vaults, but in movement, in transformation, in the drifting stories of water and time. When carbon dioxide floats through the sky and settles gently on the surface of the sea, it does not vanish. It dissolves. The ocean takes it in sip by invisible sip, as though it were listening. Once inside, the carbon becomes part of the great aquatic conversation. Some of it stays as dissolved gas. Some reacts with water to form carbonic acid. Some breaks down further into bicarbonate and carbonate, whispering between molecules like ancient phrases passed from one tide to the next. This balance is delicate. Too much carbon dioxide makes the ocean more acidic, a soft shift, but one that changes everything. Shell-building creatures struggle to make their armor. Coral reefs, those brilliant underwater cities, begin to fade. The invisible exchange becomes a little less quiet, a little more strained. But still, the ocean holds on, doing its part, drawing breath for the planet. Much of this carbon, once dissolved, finds its way into life. The phytoplankton, microscopic plants that float with sunlight in the upper layers of the sea, are the ocean's green lungs. With the help of sunlight and nutrients, they pull carbon dioxide from the water and turn it into food. Each tiny cell is a miracle, spinning light and carbon into life. Together, these drifting billions produce half the oxygen we breathe. With every second, they take carbon from the water, grow, divide, and feed the ocean's food web. And when they die, they begin another journey. Dead phytoplankton sink slowly toward the deep. Some are eaten by tiny zooplankton, who then release the carbon again through breath or waste. Some fall farther, gathering into clumps of organic snow that drift like memories down through the twilight zone. These particles, rich in carbon, are eaten, digested, or finally settle on the seafloor. It is called the biological pump, a gentle name for a grand mechanism, one that removes carbon from the surface and tucks it away in the deep, where it may rest for centuries. And so the ocean breathes in its own way, not in and out, but up and down. Carbon falls into the darkness and only very slowly returns. In the deep sea, where sunlight never touches, carbon becomes sediment. Some is eaten by creatures adapted to eternal night. Some is buried. Some is transformed by pressure into stone. This carbon is not lost. It is waiting, part of a longer rhythm, one that takes place in centuries, not seasons. Currents play their part too. Cold water from the poles sinks, carrying surface carbon with it. Warm water rises elsewhere, sometimes releasing carbon back into the air. These giant loops, the thermohaline circulation, act like conveyor belts of breath. They move not just water, but memory, nutrients, and life. And carbon travels with them, silent and steady, from pole to equator and back again. The creatures of the ocean hold carbon in their bodies. A jellyfish poolsing under moonlight, a whale gliding through blue shadow, a school of fish flashing silver and gone. Each breath, each heartbeat, each scale and bone is built in part from carbon drawn from the sea. When these creatures die, they contribute to the deep snow, the sinking breath of the ocean. Even a whale fall, when a massive body settles on the seafloor, becomes a feast for hundreds of species and a storehouse of carbon, hidden beneath miles of water. But this balance is tender. As humans release more carbon into the sky, the ocean stretches to hold it. It has taken in nearly a third of all emissions we have ever made. But this generosity comes at a cost. Ocean acidification harms coral, weakens shells, shifts the chemistry of life. Warmer waters hold less carbon, reducing the ocean's ability to absorb more. And still, The sea keeps breathing, slower now, heavier. Yet beauty remains. Seagrass meadows, kelp forests, and mangrove swamps fringe the coasts with green and gold. These are blue carbon ecosystems, places where carbon is pulled from water and stored in roots, in peat, in the sediment below. A single acre of mangrove can store more carbon than an acre of rainforest. And unlike the open ocean, this carbon is held in place, anchored by living roots, locked in soft mud, guarded by the rhythm of tides. When left undisturbed, these places become sanctuaries for carbon and for life. You can almost feel the weight of it, the invisible carbon moving through water, through creature, through time. A drop of seawater holds more than salt, it holds breath, memory, and change. And when the wind lifts spray from a cresting wave, that carbon might rise again into the sky, where it will drift perhaps across mountains, across deserts, across forests. It will settle again, in rain or snow, in leaf or soil or ocean once more. This is the quiet wonder of the ocean's exchange, not just that it stores carbon, but that it shares it, moves it, shapes it, not with urgency but with elegance, not with greed but with grace. When you stand by the sea and watch the waves curl and break, know that the breath of the world is moving before you, that the air you just exhaled may one day rest beneath the waves, that the carbon in your cells may drift again, through plankton, through tide, through time. And perhaps in knowing this, you will begin to see the ocean differently, not as distance, not as depth, but as a partner in breath, as a mirror of our own cycles, as the place where the invisible becomes everything. Let us drift now below the waves, where the light grows dim and the water thickens into silence. This is the twilight zone, not darkness, not light, but a soft in-between, where strange forms glide and carbon makes its quiet descent. From the surface above, where the wind stirs whitecaps and sunlight dances on waves, carbon has begun a journey downward, carried by the tiny remains of life. It falls in flecks and flakes, in cells and shells, in threads of mucus spun by plankton and abandoned in the sea. This snow, marine snow, they call it, drifts through the water column, and each flake is a packet of carbon, once breathed by the sky, now surrendering itself to the deep. Along the way, this falling snow feeds a hidden world. Lanternfish dart through shadows, rising each night to feed and sinking each day into the dark. Shrimp and jellies, strange with delicate limbs and glowing parts, graze on the slow rain of dead things. Each bite, each breath reshapes the carbon, sending some back upward, keeping some to build new tissue. The ocean is not still, it churns even in silence, and carbon follows, endlessly rearranged. Some carbon never makes it to the bottom. It is caught mid-fall, dissolved back into the water, or consumed by microbes whose entire lives unfold in a space no wider than a thread. These bacteria play a quiet but mighty role. They recycle. They turn dead carbon into nutrients, breaking it down and releasing it, or building it into their own bodies, ready to be eaten by something larger. Even here, in the thin blue dark where pressure tightens and light disappears, the carbon cycle flows, not in rushes, but in pulses. Where the ocean deepens past 1,000 meters, past the reach of most sunlight and most swimmers, the real resting grounds begin. Carbon that reaches this far is less likely to rise again. It settles into soft mud, layer on layer, year after year. Some of it will stay there for thousands of years. Some will become part of the very geology of the ocean floor, compacted into sedimentary rock, layered with history. Here, time slows. Here, carbon sleeps. Yet even in sleep, the carbon waits. It is not lost. Volcanoes may one day lift that carbon back into air. Plate tectonics may raise it into mountains. Ocean currents, slow and looping, may return it toward the surface, where it might again meet light and air. The carbon never truly ends, it simply cycles through forms, from sky to cell to stone and back. Back near the surface, seaweeds stretch toward sunlight. Kelp forests rise like underwater trees, swaying in the rhythm of tides. These vast green jungles of the sea are among the fastest-growing plants on Earth. They pull carbon from the water with relentless grace, spinning it into long blades, thick holdfasts, and branching fronds. When pieces of kelp break off, they drift. Some wash ashore. Some sink and become part of the seabed. In every part of their growth, in every part of their falling, kelp moves carbon from place to place. And near the shore, in warmer waters, seagrasses grow in underwater meadows. Their blades wave gently beneath the waves, catching sediment, softening storms, and pulling carbon into their roots. Unlike ocean plants that drift, these grasses anchor themselves. And with every year they build more soil below, carbon-rich sediment that stacks slowly and stays. These meadows, though easily overlooked, store immense amounts of carbon, locking it away in ways few ecosystems can match. Mangroves, with their tangled limbs and salt-soaked roots, do the same. Their leaves pull carbon from the sky. Their roots trap organic matter, fallen leaves, and silt. Over time, a rich mud forms, heavy with stored carbon. These coastal forests are carbon vaults, and their presence offers more than storage. They buffer storms, hold back erosion, and shelter the young of countless marine species. But they are vulnerable. When cleared for development or lost to rising seas, the carbon they held so gently escapes into the air once more. Even coral reefs, built by tiny animals whose skeletons rise together into towers and arches of stone, hold carbon in their very form. Though sensitive to warming and acidification, these reefs are born from a carbon conversation, calcium and carbonate, drawn from seawater, shaping the skeletons of life. When reefs thrive, carbon rests in beauty. When reefs bleach and break, the balance begins to tremble. And humans, we too, live in this cycle. Our ships cross the sea, our cities line the coast, our breath joins the air that meets the tide. We eat the fish that fed on the plankton that turned sunlight into carbon and carbon into life. Every meal we take from the ocean is a part of this invisible exchange. And with every act, every engine, every fire, every factory, we send carbon into the air that the ocean must hold. We have asked much of the sea. But the sea is not endless. Its arms are wide but not without limits. As it takes in more carbon, the chemistry shifts. The water becomes more acidic, harder for shelled creatures to survive. The balance tilts. Still the ocean tries, drawing, dissolving, cycling, but it whispers for rest. In response, we can give it space to breathe again, protect the kelp forests, restore the mangroves, leave the seagrass meadows untouched, let the coral reefs recover. These are not just acts of conservation, they are acts of carbon kindness. They are a way of joining the cycle, not breaking it. And in time, the ocean may regain its rhythm. Carbon will still flow, it must, but it will do so gently, with balance, with grace. The snow will still fall in the deep. The plankton will still bloom under sun. The whales will still rise and dive, carrying breath between worlds. Above all, the ocean reminds us that not all power is loud, that the most essential exchanges may be invisible, that carbon, in its soft journey through water, holds the planet steady. So when you hear the waves or see the horizon shimmer, remember the breath beneath it all. The quiet flow of carbon, drifting endlessly, carrying the story of the world in every drop. Let us remain with the sea a little longer, as the waves slow and dusk settles over the water like a breath held in reverence. This is the hour when the ocean begins to soften its voice, when its invisible labors continue quietly beneath the surface. Carbon is still moving, even now, even here, shifting softly from creature to current, from light to shadow, from form to form in the most ancient of conversations. And as we drift through this final chapter of the ocean story, we begin to see how carbon, though unseen, ties together all the corners of the blue world and ours. There is carbon inside the pulse of a jellyfish, delicate and translucent, rising and falling through the water as if following some rhythm older than the moon. That carbon once belonged to a plankton cell, long ago touched by sunlight. It moved through the jelly's body, was exhaled and returned again to the sea. In this way, the simplest lives echo the grandest truths, that no part of the ocean stands alone and no breath is ever truly lost. The carbon in a grain of sand may have once formed the shell of a creature who lived millions of years ago. Over time, the shell sank, broke, crumbled, and became sediment. Waves ground it finer. Now it rests at the edge of the sea, warmed by sun, kissed by tide. That grain may one day be lifted by a storm, caught in a current, and travel to a coral reef, where it might join new life again. Even in its stillness, it is part of the cycle, not forgotten, only waiting. Far below, in the hadal trenches of the sea, those deepest parts where the pressure is crushing and the cold, complete carbon still finds its way. Whale falls drift down like gifts. Organic particles settle in slow spirals. Strange, blind creatures feed on what arrives, each interaction a soft continuation of the cycle. Here, carbon may rest for thousands of years, layered in mud, layered in time. But the story does not end. The tectonic plates shift. The seabed rises. What was once bottom may one day become shore, and the carbon hidden there will breathe again. Tides are the ocean's lungs. With each rise and fall, carbon is exchanged along the coasts. Mangroves stretch out their roots and catch debris and carbon-rich sediment. Seagrass meadows pulse with tidal motion, pulling in what the waves offer. These edge ecosystems are not passive recipients. They are active participants. They catch, store, and re-release carbon with the rhythm of the moon. They do not hold the carbon forever, but long enough for balance to return. And balance is what the ocean craves. Not silence, not stillness, but balance, the gentle shifting where each piece knows its part. When we fill the air with too much carbon, the ocean stretches to absorb it, but the more it takes, the more its chemistry changes. The water grows sour, shells thin, reefs bleach. Fish migrate to colder waters. The balance leans uncertain. The cycle begins to lose its grace. Yet carbon is not the villain. It is only doing what it has always done, moving, sharing, transforming. The harm comes from speed, from excess, from forgetting that cycles need rest and systems need time. When we burn too fast, extract too deeply, change too quickly, the system staggers. And the ocean, vast though it is, begins to tremble. But the sea remembers how to heal, and we can help by reducing emissions, by protecting marine sanctuaries, by restoring kelp forests and mangroves, by changing how we fish, how we farm, how we live. Even the smallest shifts, a choice, a habit, a policy, ripple outward like drops in tide. The carbon follows, and with it, the chance to begin again. In laboratories and research vessels, scientists now track carbon as it moves through the water. They follow its path from icebergs to equator, from surface to seafloor. They measure it in the breath of dolphins, in the shells of clams, in the skeletons of coral. And their maps tell the same story the sea already knows, that carbon is not just a chemical, but a thread that binds all life, from the drift of plankton to the gaze of whales. Somewhere a child plays at the shoreline, digging with hands in wet sand, unaware that beneath their fingers lies carbon older than memory. They lift a shell to their ear and hear the hush of waves, the breath of the planet. That shell, that sand, the wind in their lungs, all carry the same substance, all part of the same exchange. It is not magic, it is matter, but it feels like both. And so we arrive at the stillness, not an end, but a knowing, that the ocean's invisible exchange is constant, sacred, alive, that it holds the balance not with power but with presence, that carbon moves through it like a whisper through water, shaping, feeding, connecting. The sea does not ask for thanks. It only asks for time, for space, for care. It asks us to notice, to understand, to remember that our lives are not beside the ocean but within it, that every exhale joins the air and every drop holds a story, that the cycle of carbon is the cycle of life, and the ocean, in all its quiet generosity, is where much of it begins. So breathe in, breathe out. Somewhere a wave rises, somewhere carbon drifts, somewhere the ocean continues its exchange, invisible, eternal, and essential. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, far from light, far from wind, far from the chatter of roots and wings, there sleeps a kind of memory so ancient that it no longer remembers the sky. It is black and glossy, or sticky and golden, or dense and brittle like old bone. This is fossil carbon, the breath of vanished worlds, sealed away in stone. Long before cities rose, long before words were written, long before even flowers bloomed, Forests lived where deserts now stretch, and seas swelled where mountains now stand. And when those forests fell and those seas dried, the carbon they carried did not vanish. It sank. It changed. It waited. To understand fossil carbon is to journey back hundreds of millions of years, to a time when ferns towered like trees, when dragonflies were as wide as hawks, when the air was thick and green and strange. Plants grew in wild abundance, pulling carbon from the sky and locking it in their stems, their leaves, their roots. Then slowly, season by season, some of those plants fell into swamps where water stilled the breath of decay. The oxygen was too scarce, the rot too slow, and so the carbon remained. Buried by silt, compressed by time, pressed into coal. In other places, tiny marine creatures floated in warm, shallow seas, building shells from calcium and carbon. When they died, their bodies drifted to the seafloor, joining layers of others like them, too small to see but together forming something vast. Pressure built, heat rose. Over millions of years, these remains became oil, became gas, slick and hidden, rich with ancient breath. These fossil fuels are not just energy. They are concentrated history. A dense archive of carbon once alive, now locked in shadow. And yet the Earth did not forget them. As plates shifted and lands rose, the buried seams of coal and pockets of oil drew nearer to the surface. Sometimes they seeped out slowly, bubbling through cracks. Sometimes they waited in silence until picked and pierced by human hands. We found them. We lit them. We built our lives around their release. But in that burning, the balance began to strain. When we burn coal or oil or gas, we are not creating new energy. We are unsealing stored sunlight, letting loose the carbon that took eons to rest. A gallon of gasoline, a glowing ember, a furnace roaring in winter, these are not just tools. They are time, unraveling. Carbon that once danced in the lungs of ancient trees now rushes back to the sky. And the sky, once patient, grows full. But before the burn, before the fire, before the extraction, the carbon slept. And in that sleep it changed. It became a different kind of memory, not the fleeting breath of leaves, but the deep stillness of stone. Coal seams, black as night, slice through mountains. Oil rests in quiet underground pools. Natural gas floats in pressurized pockets, waiting for release. Each form is different, but each began as life. Fossil carbon is not dead. It is paused. Some of the oldest coal lies in the Appalachian Mountains, where once tropical swamps thrived under a thick green canopy. Now those swamps are gone, and in their place, deep veins of carbon cut through the rock like threads of buried story. In the Middle East, vast oil fields lie beneath deserts that were once oceans. In Siberia, frozen gas hides in permafrost, locked beneath layers of ice and soil. Fossil carbon is everywhere, not as a curse, but as a sign that the Earth remembers everything. And yet, for all its age, fossil carbon is fragile. When disturbed, it moves quickly. Once lit, it cannot be returned. The carbon that took millions of years to settle into the Earth escapes in seconds through smokestacks and exhaust pipes. This sudden release overwhelms the sky's balance. The carbon, once part of trees and shells and breath, now crowds the air, traps heat, and stirs the climate's rhythm from lullaby to fever. Still, there is wonder in the story of how fossil carbon came to be. It teaches us patience. It teaches us depth. It shows that even after death, even after burial, even after forgetting, life leaves something behind. A signature, a presence, a gift. The coal beneath our feet once shaded the earth. The oil in distant sands once floated in seas filled with light. The gas that burns in a flame once belonged to something that lived and moved and fed and fell. We often think of fossils as bones in museums, as trilobites pressed in shale. But fossil carbon is something deeper. It is not the form of life, but its breath captured and transformed by time. It reminds us that carbon does not leave. It only changes shape. The energy in our machines, in our homes, in our cities, it all began in the slow, silent photosynthesis of ancient leaves. That knowledge is humbling, and it is a call. For if we can remember that our power comes from deep time, from once living things, perhaps we can begin to live more gently. Perhaps we can find new ways to light our homes without unsealing the planet's memory. Perhaps we can let some of that ancient breath remain where it lies, as a story not yet disturbed, as a gift not yet unwrapped. So let us walk gently near the seams of coal. Let us move carefully around the wells and rigs. Let us pause before every flame and ask not only what it gives, but what it releases. Because every flicker is a thread pulled from the past. And the more we pull, the more the earth sighs. And yet she has not stopped offering. The sun still shines. The wind still moves. The tides still turn. New sources of energy rise clean and bright, asking only for our trust. If fossil carbon is the story of what once was, then these new flows are the story of what could be. They are not replacements. They are returns to a balance that fossil carbon itself once held. And in that return, we honor the past. We listen to the Earth's old breath. We let the fossils rest and begin again. Let us follow the buried breath of the Earth deeper still, where darkness thickens and the weight of time presses upon every grain of stone. This is the world beneath the world, the vault of fossils, the library of long-dead forests, the place where carbon once caught in leaf and plankton now waits in blackened forms. Here, coal and oil and gas do not shout. They murmur. Their stories are long, quiet, heavy with age. And yet they still shape the air above, still stir the heat of cities, still change the color of the sky. To understand fossil carbon is to read a tale told not in chapters, but in layers, each one built from the breath of the distant past. Imagine a swamp 300 million years ago where giant ferns unfurl beside shallow waters and dragonflies drift through thick, humid air. The plants here are rich with carbon, drawing it in through every leaf, building strong stems, wide roots, thick trunks. The swamp floods, the plants fall. Mud and water cover them. The rot slows, and so begins the process of becoming coal, not in months or years, but in eons. The weight of sediment presses down. The heat rises from within the earth. The molecules rearrange, and the carbon, once bright with photosynthesis, darkens into rock. Elsewhere in a shallow sea, tiny organisms float in sunlit layers. They take in carbon through the water, through the currents, through their shells. When they die, their bodies sink. Layer after layer, they pile up on the seafloor. Bacteria feed on them. Sediment buries them. Time compresses them. And eventually, the soft pressure of ages transforms them into oil. A slow alchemy, a gentle, fireless distillation. A transformation so quiet it escapes the imagination, and yet it continues, even now, under oceans and plains. This process, known as diagenesis, continues beneath us, reshaping what once lived into dense, carbon-rich forms. Natural gas may form above or beside oil, catching in pockets where porous rock meets impermeable capstone. Trapped, invisible, it waits. Each field of fossil fuel is a monument to time's patience. Each reservoir is a capsule of past carbon decisions, trees that grew, organisms that lived, climates that shifted, and landscapes that fell beneath the waves. And then came us. With drills and pumps, with picks and tunnels, with flame and thirst, we began to tap into this vast storage. At first it was a wonder, energy pulled from rock, light made from darkness, motion made from stillness. Cities gleamed, machines roared, night lost its silence. Fossil carbon fueled it all: trains, factories, furnaces, and flight. We built our world on carbon's past. We called it progress. But the carbon we released had a destination. It did not vanish. It returned to the sky, molecule by molecule, furnace by furnace, chimney by chimney. What took millions of years to trap, we began releasing in mere decades. The air, once balanced, began to swell with carbon dioxide, invisible, odorless, but potent. It wrapped the earth in a thinner, tighter blanket. The temperature rose. The climate shifted. And fossil carbon, once buried in sleep, now stirred the winds. The carbon in coal is dense and immediate. When burned, it floods the air with carbon dioxide, along with particulates and sulfur that blacken both air and lung. Oil, refined into gasoline and diesel, spreads carbon through exhaust pipes and smokestacks, turning roadways into breathways of the past. Natural gas, once praised for its cleaner burn, still releases carbon and methane, an even more potent greenhouse gas. Each flame, each engine, each flick of a switch lit by fossil fuel tells a story. a moment of convenience bought with breath from long ago. And yet the story is not only one of loss, it is also of learning. With every well drilled, we came to understand geology better. With every power plant built, we learned more about energy's flow. And with each year of rising carbon in the sky, we have begun to listen. The earth speaks through heat, through flood, through fire, through silence. It does not punish, it simply responds. Scientists now map the carbon curve, tracking emissions, modeling futures, tracing the pathways of carbon from underground to atmosphere. They drill ice cores from Antarctica, reading the carbon content of air trapped in bubbles 100,000 years old. They measure the carbon in soils, in oceans, in forests. And the data is clear. Fossil carbon, once balanced by slow geologic rhythms, now overwhelms the cycle with human speed. But knowing is a gift, for in knowledge lies choice. We know where the carbon comes from, we know where it goes, and we know how to slow the release. Fossil fuels once seemed infinite, but they are not. Their abundance was only illusion, a trick of time and storage. We are nearing the end of the easy oil, the cheap gas, the rich coal, and as those seams thin, new paths open. Renewable energy does not replace fossil carbon, it transcends it. Solar panels draw new sunlight. Wind turbines spin with air still cooled by ancient forests. Hydro and geothermal tap into energy without unsealing breath long buried. These are not perfect solutions, but they are possible ones, choices that allow the old carbon to remain in its slumber, undisturbed. And perhaps in some places that is what should happen. Let the coal stay in its seam like a poem pressed into rock. Let the oil rest in its aquifer like a sea that never returned. Let the gas remain still, like a final breath not yet needed. To leave fossil carbon where it lies is to show respect, for the lives it once was, for the balance it once kept, for the silence it now holds. Imagine a world where we tread more softly, where the heat in our homes comes not from a tree that fell 300 million years ago, but from the wind that stirred the grass yesterday. Where our lights glow with present energy, not ancient loss. Where fossil carbon becomes less a fuel and more a teacher, a reminder of time, of patience, of the long arc of balance. And in that world, perhaps the sky will lighten again. The oceans will breathe easier. The storms will calm. And the carbon, still moving, still cycling, will find once more the rhythm it once knew, slow, gentle, continuous. For now, the story of fossil carbon is still being written, but we hold the pen, and the next chapter, quieter, cleaner, kinder, is ours to begin. Now let us rise gently from the deep places where fossil carbon sleeps and return to the living world above, to the hills and rivers, to the forests and skies, where the past meets the present in every breath. The story of fossil carbon is not only about what lies below. It is about how that buried breath now moves through everything, through power lines and exhaust trails, through warming winds and rising tides, through the changing balance of life itself. And yet, even in this moment of imbalance, the earth whispers that renewal is still possible, that the fire we kindled does not have to burn unchecked. Look to the atmosphere, where carbon now gathers in thin but growing concentration. It hangs not as smoke or smog, but as invisible warmth, catching sunlight, slowing its escape, turning gentle seasons into sharp-edged ones. Glaciers, once ancient and unmoving, now retreat year by year. Oceans expand with heat, their waves creeping farther onto the land. Forests shift northward. Storms grow more sudden, more fierce. This is the consequence of pulling time too quickly from the earth, of releasing in centuries what took millions of years to store. And yet balance is not beyond reach. The same carbon that now warms the air can still be guided, still be gathered, still be returned to soil and root and rock. The world is not broken, it is bending, and in that bend there is still space to act with care. Fossil carbon has taught us much about energy, about growth, about speed, but it can also teach us about pause, about humility, about the value of restraint. There are places where the healing has begun. Old coal mines, long abandoned, fill with water and become wetlands, rich with birdsong and life. Oil fields, capped and quieted, give way to meadows. Reclaimed lands bloom with wildflowers and grasses, their roots drawing new carbon downward. In these landscapes we glimpse the future, not a return to the past, but a continuation, wiser and slower. Technology, too, offers gentle hands. Machines that pull carbon from the air mimicking leaves. Biochar, a kind of charcoal made from waste that can be returned to soil, holding carbon for centuries. Buildings made of wood instead of steel, storing carbon in their beams. Concrete blended with minerals that capture emissions. These are not fantasies. They are tools. They are the Earth's memory reshaped into solutions. And perhaps more powerful still are the natural systems, the forests and grasslands, the peatlands and mangroves that have always held carbon with grace. If left undisturbed, if restored and protected, they can pull gigatons of carbon from the sky. Not through force, but through photosynthesis. Not through extraction, but through growth. The answer may not be in digging deeper, but in growing taller, in letting roots spread wide and unbroken. Education, too, is a kind of healing. Children learning how trees breathe, how soil stores, how climate shifts with chemistry. Communities mapping their emissions, their forests, their futures. Scientists sharing data not to frighten but to empower. Stories told around fires not of fear but of care. These small things, done in many places, begin to rethread the pattern, begin to mend what fossil fire has unraveled. The carbon that moves through your breath today may once have belonged to a fern crushed beneath an ancient swamp, or to plankton floating in a sea no longer there, or to a mammoth breathing on a cold plain beneath a sky untouched by cities. That carbon now flows in your blood, in your thoughts, in the warmth of your skin, and when you breathe out, it returns to the cycle, a gift, a continuation. You are not separate from fossil carbon. You are a turning page in its long story. What then will you do with that page? Will it be another chapter of fire and forgetting, or a chapter of tending, of remembering, of quiet repair? The earth has offered its deepest breath not to be emptied, but to be understood, to show us that everything is connected through time, through soil, through air. In the end, fossil carbon is not a mistake. It is a message. It tells us that life is long, that energy is precious, that balance once lost can be found again not through haste but through harmony. And so let the coal remain in its seam, the oil in its cradle, the gas in its quiet chamber. Let new energy rise from wind and wave and light. Let forests grow and soils darken with life. Let the carbon flow again with grace, not rush. Let the planet breathe in peace. Because we are still writing the story. And if we listen to the fossils, to the fire, to the roots, to the sky, we may find that the next chapter is not about ending, but about returning, about balance, about breath, about letting time be slow again. Step into a forest at dawn, where the air is cool and quiet, where every tree holds its breath for the coming sun. Mist hangs low like a whispered memory, and in the stillness something ancient unfolds. These trees are not only standing still, they are listening. They are measuring. They are counting each molecule of carbon that drifts past their leaves, the exhales of foxes and deer, of beetles and owls, of you. And with each breath, each invisible offering of carbon dioxide, the forest responds. It draws that carbon inward, folds it into sugar, builds it into trunk and root and ring. This is no accident. It is precision. It is intention. The forest counts our exhales and turns them into life. Photosynthesis is the forest's silent engine, not roaring or rushing, but unfolding gently leaf by leaf. With sunlight as its spark, water from the soil and carbon from the air, the tree performs a soft alchemy. What you breathed out yesterday may now be part of a fern's frond. What the bird exhaled last season may have become part of the bark that shelters its nest. Each tree becomes a monument of breath made solid, a living record of shared atmosphere. But the forest does not work alone. It is a symphony. Every species, from towering redwoods to moss clinging to fallen logs, plays its part. Some trees grow fast, catching light in gaps and pulling carbon quickly from the air. Others grow slowly, storing carbon deep in their bodies year after year, century after century. Together they form a tapestry of timing, a balance of rhythms. Fast and slow, shallow and deep, temporary and enduring, all woven by carbon's touch. And beneath the soil, the roots speak their own language. Carbon drawn in through leaves flows downward, feeding the hidden network. Mycorrhizal fungi receive it, and in return they send nutrients, protect against pathogens, extend the reach of each root. In this underground collaboration, carbon becomes currency. A gift, a signal, a thread. The trees do not hoard what they gather. They share. They send carbon to neighbors in need, to kin, even to strangers. This generosity is not charity. It is survival. It is wisdom. Forests breathe in and out with the seasons. In spring and summer they inhale deeply, drawing in vast amounts of carbon dioxide as they grow leaves, expand branches, stretch toward the light. In autumn, when the light fades and leaves fall, the forest exhales not just through decay but through rest. The carbon returns in part to the air, in part to the soil. Some is held in trunks, some in seeds, some in the dark loam beneath your feet. This seasonal cycle is not just local. It shapes the global atmosphere. Satellites orbiting the Earth can see it, the rise and fall of carbon, year after year, as forests breathe. Tropical forests near the equator hum with constant carbon exchange. Here, there is no winter, only a rhythm of rain and heat. The trees grow thick and tall, storing carbon in vines and canopies, in birds and insects, in every fiber of green. Temperate forests, with their changing seasons, move more slowly, but still hold vast carbon in their layered growth. Boreal forests in the north lock carbon in needles, bark, and especially soil, their cool temperatures slowing decay, allowing more carbon to rest in roots and moss. Each forest speaks its own dialect of carbon, and each is vulnerable in its own way. A fire in a dry forest can send centuries of stored carbon rushing into the air in days. Logging, even if replanted, disrupts the balance for young trees, while eager cannot store as much as those that stood before. When forests are cleared for pasture or roads, the counting stops. The carbon returns to the air, and the system loses its breath. Yet forests are also resilient. Plant a tree and the carbon conversation begins anew. Restore a woodland, and within years, carbon begins to settle again in leaves, in soil, in shadow. Some species return first, the pioneers. Others follow, deep-rooted, long-lived, bearing carbon like memory. Over time, if left undisturbed, the forest rebuilds its accounting, its ability to measure, to gather, to give. Even dead trees play a role. A fallen log feeds insects, fungi, microbes. As it decays, its carbon moves into soil, into air, into the bodies of those who feed upon it. This decay is not waste. It is transfer. It is the forest making room for more. And through it all, the counting continues, slow, sure, invisible to the eye, but never ceasing. Walk through a forest and you breathe better. The air is cooler, calmer, clearer. This is not magic, it is chemistry. It is the result of millions of quiet exchanges, carbon in, oxygen out, life expanding inward. The trees do not do this for us, but we benefit. And in recognizing that, we are invited to participate not as takers but as stewards. The forest's ability to count our exhales is not just a poetic idea. It is a measurable truth. Instruments placed among the trees record the carbon flux, the in and out, the rise and fall. Scientists track the carbon stored in biomass, in soil, in roots. And yet, even without numbers, we can feel it. We can sense that in the stillness of trees, something essential is held, something that began with breath and returns to it. To see a forest is to witness a carbon story in motion, each leaf a page, each root a sentence, each ring a year written in breath. And to know this is to begin to see our place differently, not as separate from the trees but as part of the same rhythm. What we exhale, they inhale. What they build, we inhabit. And when we plant trees, protect old growth, restore degraded woods, we are not just storing carbon. We are honoring the cycle. We are letting the forests count again, breathe again, hold again. We are offering our exhales with respect. The forest is listening. It always has been, and it will keep listening as long as we let it grow. Let us wander deeper now into the forest, where sunlight filters through layers of green, and the air is filled with the scent of damp bark and old leaves. Each step forward is a step backward in time, through ecosystems shaped not by human hands but by the slow breathing of trees. The carbon they hold is not just locked away in trunks or buried in soil. It is part of an ongoing memory, written in the quiet language of rings and roots, branches and shade. These trees are not simply alive. They are historians. They remember droughts and floods, fires and storms, all through the way they grow, all through the way they count. In every tree trunk, rings form, one for each year of growth. Some are wide, some are narrow. Each one holds carbon that was once part of the air. With every new ring, the tree pulls in more, adding to its weight, adding to its memory. A single century-old oak may store a ton of carbon and still it stands, drawing in more year after year. But the carbon held in trees is not static. It is active. It supports leaves that feed insects, branches that host birds, roots that trade sugars with fungi. The forest is not a vault. It is a pulse. Beneath the trees, the soil is rich and deep, a living, breathing sponge of nutrients and memory. Carbon flows into this soil through fallen leaves, through root hairs, through the slow decay of all things once green. Microbes stir, earthworms tunnel. Fungi thread their filaments through the earth, linking roots across the forest floor. Each handful of soil beneath a healthy forest may contain more carbon than all the trees above it. And unlike trees, which may fall or burn, this soil carbon can remain for centuries if undisturbed. Forests are not uniform. A rainforest near the equator, bursting with biodiversity, cycles carbon at a rapid pace. It pulls in vast amounts, but much is returned through decomposition, through fast growth and fast death. In contrast, an old-growth forest in the north may grow slowly but holds carbon longer in deep roots, in thick mosses, in cold, dark soil. Both types matter, both contribute, and both are at risk if not protected with care. In some places, forests are regrowing, reclaiming lands once cleared. These young forests are carbon-hungry, pulling in air with eager leaves. They may not hold as much yet, but their appetite is vast. In other places, ancient forests stand massive trees with thick bark, hollow trunks, and deep, intertwining roots. These giants hold more carbon than 1,000 saplings, and their loss is not just the loss of wood, but of centuries of breath. There is wisdom in letting forests age. Mature trees store carbon more steadily. Their ecosystems are more balanced. Their roots reach deeper, their canopies cast wider shade. They protect the soil from erosion, guard against drought, and offer homes to species found nowhere else. In every old tree is a slow, steady cycle of giving, of taking, of returning. And when such a tree falls, it begins another chapter, not an end. Its body feeds the soil. Its hollow becomes a den. Its nutrients spread outward. Even in death it counts. Humans have learned to measure forest carbon with satellites and towers, drones and soil probes. We map the carbon sinks, calculate the rates, model the future. And yet the forest still knows more than we do, not in numbers but in feel. It adjusts its growth with rainfall. It shifts its species with temperature. It thickens or thins depending on pressure and time. It knows how to balance carbon better than any machine. All we must do is let it. But letting it does not mean doing nothing. It means protecting it from harm, from chainsaws and bulldozers, from careless fires and invasive species, from the slow creep of roads that fragment the whole. It means planting where the land is bare but also leaving places untouched. It means listening not to prophets but to patterns. Because once a forest is lost, its carbon rises swiftly. The cycle unravels. Indigenous peoples around the world have long understood these patterns. Their stewardship of forests is rooted in deep observation, in cultural memory, in mutual respect. They burn carefully, not recklessly. They harvest with reverence, not greed. They understand that a forest is not a resource, but a relative, one that gives when it is honored, one that fades when it is used without thought. Their practices store carbon not just in trees, but in culture. And now, as climate urgency grows, forests are seen not just as sanctuaries of life, but as solutions. Programs emerge to protect them, to plant new ones, to pay communities for keeping carbon in place. Yet these efforts must move slowly, wisely. A fast-growing plantation may pull in carbon, but it lacks the complexity of a forest. True carbon balance needs layers, tall trees, small shrubs, deep roots, decomposers, birdsong, silence. In cities, small forests bloom in parks and along roadsides. Urban trees soften heat, filter air, offer shade. Each one holds a bit of carbon, but together they create microclimates, small lungs for communities. Planting a tree in a schoolyard, watching it grow year by year, watching children grow with it, this too is part of the cycle. And then there is rewilding, the return of land to nature, the letting go of control. In abandoned fields and old pastures, forests can return on their own. Seeds blow in, soil recovers, life reclaims. These self-planted forests may not be manicured, but they are real. They count our exhales in their own wild way. To stand in a forest, eyes closed, breath slow, is to feel part of something vast and kind. The carbon you carry in your lungs is welcome here. The trees do not judge it. They receive it. And in return, they give oxygen, shelter, beauty, calm. They ask only that we do not take too much, that we remember how long it takes to grow what is easy to destroy. So let us walk gently. Let us plant with care and protect with purpose. Let us let the forest count again, not just our exhales, but our actions. In this counting, there is hope. In this exchange, there is peace. Now let us linger in the quiet of the forest, where the light dims into gold and every leaf seems to shimmer with memory. This is not just a place of trees, it is a breathing system, a reservoir of time. Each inhale we take here feels fuller, clearer. Each exhale softer. And as the shadows stretch and birds return to their branches, the forest continues its task, unchanged by the passing of hours. It does not race. It does not forget. It simply breathes slowly, steadily, counting our exhales, holding our carbon in its roots and weaving it into life. Forests are more than landscapes. They are climate partners. Carbon that once crowded the sky finds stillness here, drawn into saplings, stored in trunks, hidden in humus. And when a forest is allowed to grow wild, undisturbed, it becomes more than a sink, it becomes a steward. One that keeps carbon close, releases it only with care, and balances the quiet chemistry of the air we all share. Not every ecosystem can do this. Not every surface holds the memory of breath. But forests do, and they always have. There are some trees that live for centuries, sequoias that saw the rise of empires, oaks that have stood through drought and war, pines that whisper of glaciers now gone. These trees carry carbon from long ago, still locked in their rings, still quiet in their cells. Their roots stretch deep into the earth's skin, where fungal threads and ancient soil microbes collaborate to keep the carbon held. And when such a tree finally falls, it does not disappear. It becomes a slow fire of transformation, not a blaze, but a fatting ember that nourishes everything around it. Decomposition in a forest is not loss, it is redistribution. Carbon returns to the soil through leaf litter, broken bark, fallen limbs. Insects move through it, fungi thread through it, bacteria soften it into richness. Even decay is an act of care. Even in its breaking down, the forest keeps counting, not as a final chapter, but as a quiet continuation. When fire moves through a forest, as it sometimes must, it too becomes part of the carbon conversation. Not all fire is destruction. In many ecosystems, low-burning flames clear dead wood, release seeds, make room for new growth. The carbon released in those moments is reabsorbed by the next generation, by shoots that rise from ash, by mosses that spread across scorched soil. But when fire becomes too frequent, too intense, driven by human changes to the climate, the balance breaks. The carbon release outweighs the carbon capture. The forest gasps instead of breathes. And yet forests continue to try. They are not static. They adapt. Tree species shift with temperature, with rainfall, with pollinators. Some forests move uphill inch by inch, year by year. Others recover in surprising ways, sprouting from blackened ground, from pasture edges, from fence lines. Given time, given space, forests heal themselves, and in doing so, they heal the air. In many regions, reforestation projects are underway. Trees planted by hand, rows upon rows, like hope taking root. Yet it is not just planting that matters. It is planning. A monoculture of fast-growing trees may pull carbon quickly, but it lacks depth, diversity, and durability. Real forests are layered with understory and canopy, with birds and bugs, with fallen logs and living soil. The deeper the diversity, the deeper the carbon. The longer the trees live, the longer the balance holds. In some countries, ancient forests still stand untouched for centuries, home to rare species, rich with stored carbon. Protecting these places is not only an act of ecological justice, it is a climate decision. Cutting them down for short-term gain releases what took lifetimes to gather. It is easier to protect a tree than to regrow it. Easier to keep carbon in place than to pull it back from the air later. Every preserved forest is a promise kept. But even small forests matter. A grove beside a stream, a hedgerow between fields, a cluster of trees on school grounds. These patches act like lungs, like memory pockets, like reminders. They are not too small to count. In fact, they are where the counting begins, in the nearby, in the local, in the personal. Your own breath, the carbon you carry, may one day rest in a tree planted by your hand. It may travel through its roots, its trunk, its fruit. It may become the branch that shades another child, the leaf that falls into another season. In this way, we become part of the cycle, not as witnesses, but as participants. Forests cannot stop climate change alone, but they can buy us time, they can teach us rhythm, they can help restore the balance we've tilted, and in their quiet they remind us that solutions do not always roar. Sometimes they stand, sometimes they root, sometimes they simply breathe. So let us protect the forests that already count our exhales. Let us plant new ones that will count for generations. Let us listen to the silence between trees, for it is filled with memory, with care, with breath that once was ours and now belongs to something greater. In the stillness of the forest, we find our own rhythm again. And in that rhythm, we begin to remember how to live in harmony with the breath of the world. Beneath the soles of your feet lies a world you cannot see, but it is more alive than it seems. It doesn't rise or shout or bloom like a flower, it hums, quietly, constantly. Within the folds of soil, deep in the layers of rock and clay, carbon rests. Some of it has only just arrived, fallen from a leaf, washed down by rain, exhaled by a root. Some of it has been sleeping for centuries, curled in the memory of once living things. This is the underground reservoir, the Earth's deep breath, held tight beneath the surface. And though it does not move quickly, it holds the power to shift the climate of the planet, depending on how gently we let it sleep. Soil at first glance may seem like dust, a mixture of particles, something to be swept away or planted into. But it is far more than that. It is a complex and living skin, made of minerals, microbes, decayed plant matter, moisture, air. And inside that skin, carbon weaves through every part. Roots release sugars into the rhizosphere, the tiny zone of soil that hugs each root, and these sugars feed bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms. In return, those microbes break down nutrients that the plant needs to grow. In this exchange, carbon is constantly moving, passed back and forth like a promise, like a secret. Over time, as leaves fall and roots die and organisms decompose, carbon accumulates. It settles into the soil in layers, some light and fleeting, some dense and enduring. This process builds organic matter, the dark richness of fertile ground. The more carbon the soil holds, the better it can retain water, support life, and regulate the planet's temperature. And when left undisturbed, this soil becomes a quiet sanctuary, a place where carbon can rest for decades, even centuries. But not all soil holds carbon equally. Grasslands, with their deep and fibrous root systems, are among the most effective carbon sinks. Each blade of grass sends roots down, and those roots are constantly growing, dying, and regrowing, feeding the soil with carbon all the while. In healthy prairies, nearly half of the ecosystem's carbon is stored underground. Unlike forests, which store much of their carbon above the ground, grasslands protect it below, where fire cannot reach it and drought cannot quickly dry it away. Wetlands are another powerful vault. In marshes and bogs, where water limits oxygen, decomposition slows. Organic matter piles up instead of breaking down. Peatlands, a type of wetland where mosses grow and layer for thousands of years, store more carbon than all the world's forests combined. A single meter of peat may hold the remains of 10,000 years of plant life. But they are delicate. Drain them, and they quickly release what they've held for ages. Burn them, and the carbon rises like smoke into the warming air. And then there are the deserts. Though often dry and sparse, even here carbon rests. Cryptobiotic crusts, thin layers of lichen, moss, and microbes, cover the soil like living blankets. They fix nitrogen, reduce erosion, and sequester small but meaningful amounts of carbon. These crusts are fragile, crushed easily by tires or footsteps, but they represent yet another way life stores breath beneath the surface. Deeper still, below the roots and topsoil, in the mineral layers and fractured rocks, carbon binds to particles of clay. This mineral-associated organic carbon is the longest sleeping of all, difficult to release, slow to cycle. It does not feed microbes or roots, but it helps stabilize the entire system. And when soil is healthy, this stable carbon accumulates over time, offering resilience even in drought or disturbance. But when soil is exposed through tilling, deforestation, overgrazing, or erosion, the sleeping carbon wakes. Microbes stirred by the sudden oxygen feast on the newly available organic matter. Carbon that was locked away begins to oxidize, rising into the sky as carbon dioxide. It is not violent, it is not sudden, but it is steady. Year by year the carbon leaves. The soil grows thinner, lighter, more brittle. The earth exhales too much. In agricultural regions, this loss is especially clear. Fields plowed each season lose their organic matter faster than they can rebuild it. Without cover crops, without compost, without rest, the soil cannot hold its carbon. Over time, the ground becomes dust, and the carbon, once rooted, becomes airborne. This is not just a climate issue. It is a fertility issue, a food issue, a future issue. Yet the soil can be healed. Regenerative practices like no-till farming, rotational grazing, cover cropping, and agroforestry help return carbon to the ground. Composting food waste, planting perennials, letting fields lie fallow. These are not new ideas. Many are ancient, practiced for centuries by those who lived in close rhythm with the land. But science now confirms their power not just to grow food, but to store carbon, to restore the balance. Urban soils, too, can hold carbon. Green roofs, community gardens, and tree-lined streets all bring carbon downward. Even a potted plant on a balcony participates in the cycle. Every root, no matter how small, makes a difference. Every bit of organic matter, a fallen leaf, a kitchen scrap, can become part of the underground breath. And so we begin to see the ground differently, not as something dead or dormant, but as something living, something that listens, something that holds. Beneath us, with every step we take, lies the story of carbon, not in burning, not in smoke, but in stillness. The earth does not rush. It waits. And in that waiting, it holds our past and offers a place for our future to take root. In the sleeping carbon beneath us lies a kind of promise that what we breathe out can be carried home again, that the soil will welcome it, that, if we let it, the earth will cradle it quietly for generations to come. Let us descend again into the folds of the earth, where carbon rests beneath our roads and gardens, our forests and fields. The deeper we go, the more the silence thickens, and yet within that stillness, the carbon continues its slow, invisible movements. Unlike the rapid breath of leaves or the rush of wind across oceans, the carbon below ground is patient. It hums through the rhythm of seasons, through the decay of roots, through the countless interactions between soil, stone, and life. It does not vanish. It settles, and in this settling it shapes everything we grow, everything we build, everything we hope to sustain. The carbon that enters the soil begins its journey not in darkness, but in sunlight. A tree draws carbon dioxide from the air, turns it into sugars, sends it down into its roots. Some of those sugars feed the tree. Others are released into the soil to nourish the community waiting there, bacteria, fungi, tiny animals, each one playing its part in the underground symphony. This initial carbon is fresh, young, and full of energy. It is called labile carbon, easily broken down, quickly cycled. It fuels microbial life, drives nutrient exchange, and sparks activity across the soil web. But not all carbon remains so quick. As some of it is consumed, transformed, and re-released as carbon dioxide, a portion becomes more stable. It binds with minerals. It becomes part of fungal cell walls of microbial bodies of complex compounds too tough to break down easily. This stabilized carbon forms the soil's long-term memory, what scientists call recalcitrant carbon. It can stay for decades, even centuries, if the soil remains protected. It is not static. It is quietly, deeply alive. Soil structure plays a vital role in how carbon is held. Aggregates, small clumps of soil bound by organic matter and microbial glue, act like miniature vaults. Inside them, carbon is shielded from air and decay. These tiny structures are fragile yet crucial. They form through biological activity, through the movement of roots, through the tread of animals. Healthy soils have more of them. Degraded soils do not. And without them, carbon slips away. Soil is not merely a sink. It is a dynamic system of exchange. Each time it is disturbed, the balance shifts. Erosion washes carbon-rich topsoil into rivers. Tilling exposes buried carbon to oxygen, accelerating its return to the air. Overgrazing compacts the earth, limiting root growth and microbial diversity. In every case, the quiet breath held beneath begins to rise not in panic but in release. The slumber ends and the sky fills. Yet even as we lose soil carbon through misuse, we are learning how to restore it. The roots of perennial grasses, for example, are champions of deep carbon storage. Unlike annual crops that die each year and leave the soil bare, perennials continue to grow, anchoring carbon year-round. Their roots extend deeper, carry more sugars, and support richer microbial networks. By replacing shallow-rooted crops with deeper-rooted systems, carbon can be moved further underground, where it is harder to disturb and easier to keep. In forests, fallen leaves and needles create a layer of litter that feeds the soil slowly. As it breaks down, it releases carbon that binds with the mineral particles below. In old-growth woodlands, the soil is dark and thick, a sign of long-held carbon. When such forests are cleared or burned, the loss is not just in trees, but in centuries of stored underground breath. Even the ash, if not absorbed back into the soil, can wash away in rain, taking with it the last traces of memory. Peatlands, long overlooked, are now recognized as critical carbon storehouses. Formed by the slow accumulation of mosses and plants in waterlogged conditions, these ecosystems grow at a glacial pace, millimeters per year. And yet in those millimeters, carbon is preserved better than in any other natural system. But they are vulnerable. A drained peatland becomes a source, not a sink. Fires in these lands burn not just vegetation, but the very soil itself. The carbon released is not from a single tree, but from millennia of quiet storage. Cities, too, sit atop sleeping carbon. Parks, lawns, gardens, even cemeteries, all hold soil rich in potential. When managed wisely with compost, with mulch, with minimal disturbance, urban soils can store surprising amounts of carbon. And they do more. They cool neighborhoods, filter water, soften noise. In this way, even our densest human spaces can participate in the planet's breath. We are also exploring the idea of artificial carbon storage in soils, adding biochar, for instance, to hold carbon in a form that resists decay. Biochar is made by heating organic material in low oxygen, creating a black, porous substance that binds carbon for hundreds of years. When added to soil, it not only stores carbon but improves fertility, water retention, and microbial life. It is a practice rooted in ancient agriculture, revived now in modern science. And then there is the mystery of deep soil carbon found meters below the surface, in layers rarely touched by roots or tools. We know less about this zone, but we suspect it holds enormous potential. In undisturbed landscapes, old forests, tallgrass prairies, alpine meadows, this carbon is safe for now. But as mining, drilling, and land conversion push deeper, we risk waking what we do not yet fully understand. Beneath it all is a simple truth. The ground is not empty. It is full of life, of cycles, of memory, and every step we take above it carries a choice to protect what sleeps or to stir it prematurely. The soil does not ask for much, only to be covered, to be nourished, to be allowed to breathe. Carbon, once in the soil, becomes part of something larger than itself. It feeds a root that feeds a tree that feeds a bird. It builds a fungus that trades with a seedling. It forms a stable compound that waits beneath a pasture for 100 years. And in this way, the carbon below is never wasted. It is not forgotten. It is the beginning of life, held gently in the dark. And when we see it, really see it, we begin to treat the earth differently. We tread more lightly. We grow more wisely. We return what we once took. We understand that beneath our feet lies not just dirt, but the breath of the past and the hope of the future, asleep in the arms of soil. Let us return one final time to the soil, not as visitors or observers, but as part of its long, unfolding rhythm. Beneath us, beneath the grasses and roots and stones, lies a reservoir of quiet intention. Carbon, carried here by leaf and root, by rain and time, sleeps in a way that is not death but rest. It waits in the fibers of broken stems, in the breath of earthworms, in the spaces between particles so small the eye cannot see. And it does not wait for nothing. It waits to return in balance, in season, in gentle continuity. If we let it rest, if we understand its pace, we become part of the great patience of the earth. The carbon stored in the soil is not just stored energy. It is a lifeline, a stabilizer of climate, a builder of structure, a nourisher of food. In the dark earth, where roots stretch and microbes trade, carbon gives shape to fertility. It is the scaffolding of resilience. Soils rich in carbon hold water like a sponge, feeding crops during drought. They resist erosion, filtering runoff, protecting rivers from sediment and nutrients. They buffer extremes, offer texture, anchor the wild communities that live above. And for the farmer, the gardener, the gatherer, the presence of soil carbon is not just science, it is something felt. A dark loam that crumbles in the hand, a scent that rises after rain, a field that yields not only food but the quiet sense that something is being given back, that the land, if treated well, returns the favor. It does not need to be forced, only invited, only supported. In many regions of the world, efforts are now being made to map soil carbon, to understand how much is held, where it lies deepest, and how fast it can be restored. This is not guesswork. It is observation. It is memory. It is the science of time. Satellite data, core samples, isotope analysis, all helping us see what the Earth already knows, that the soil is not a passive layer. It is an active reservoir, changing with every root that grows and every footprint we leave. And with that understanding, new approaches begin to take hold. Indigenous agricultural systems, long overlooked, are recognized for their wisdom, methods that preserve soil cover, rotate crops with care, use animals not to deplete but to enrich. In the Andes, in the Sahel, in the Pacific Islands, traditional practices echo a deep knowing that the land breathes, and we must not interrupt its exhale too often. In industrial agriculture, regenerative methods begin to spread. Farmers plant cover crops not just to shade the ground, but to send carbon downward. They reduce tillage, letting fungi thread their way through the soil undisturbed. They compost waste into richness, feed the microbial life beneath, and watch as yields rise and resilience returns. Not because they added more, but because they interrupted less. Because they understood that the soil does the work if we let it. The global conversation is changing. Carbon markets now offer payment not only for emissions reduced, but for carbon stored. Projects that restore degraded lands are being measured not only in trees planted, but in roots grown, in soil darkened. And while the systems are not perfect, the idea is clear, that storing carbon in soil is not an afterthought. It is a central path forward, a solution that is quiet, scalable, and beautifully natural. But perhaps the most meaningful change comes not in policy, but in perception. When we begin to see soil as alive, we treat it with respect. When we know that the carbon we emit can find rest below us, if only we offer the space, we change the way we live. We start to ask, how can I feed the soil? How can I disturb it less? How can I grow things in a way that gives back? The answer is often simple. Leave roots in the ground. Add organic matter. Reduce exposure. Trust that the earth knows what to do with what we give. The breath we release will not float forever. If we let it, it will return to the land, be caught in a blade of grass, be fed into a fungal thread, and settle once more into the soil's quiet heart. And even beyond agriculture, the soil continues to give. In forests, in tundra, in mountain meadows, in the sparse drylands where shrubs clutch at life, carbon flows downward, slowly, reliably. In every ecosystem, no matter how small, the exchange is alive. What we breathe out, the soil takes in. What the sun builds, the earth stores. This rhythm is older than cities, older than language. When we disturb this process, when we strip the land bare, when we mine its depths without return, when we clear the roots and turn the crust, we do more than release carbon. We undo connection. We break a contract between air and earth, between life and time. And in that break, the atmosphere swells with what no longer has a home. But when we restore the land, when we plant, compost, rotate, protect, the carbon finds its way back. It does not need perfect conditions. It only needs space, time, care. It begins with a seed, a spade, a season of rest, and then it builds like a quiet wave, a downward breath, a future returning to its roots. And so, as we walk the world, let us remember what lies beneath. The soil is not something we stand on. It is something we are part of. The carbon beneath us is not hidden. It is held. And if we let it sleep, if we keep it fed and shaded and whole, it will carry our excess gently, without complaint. Because that is what the earth does. It holds what we release. It turns it into something useful, something fertile, something full of potential. The sleeping carbon beneath us is not our burden. It is our inheritance. And in our care for it, we begin to write a new story, one rooted not in fire but in stillness, not in loss but in return, not in forgetting but in remembering what the earth has always known. Above the tallest trees, where light thickens into mist and wind begins to forget the ground, clouds begin to form. They are soft, pale travelers made of water and light, shaped by heat and air. But hidden within their quiet drift is something more, a memory. Each cloud that moves across the sky may carry a whisper of the forest below. It may carry scent or salt or the breath of leaves, because clouds do not rise alone. They rise with the help of forests, of roots and vapor, of chemistry and rhythm. They are not only born of oceans, they are also born of trees. When a forest breathes, it releases more than oxygen. It releases volatile organic compounds, tiny invisible particles that rise with the heat of day. These particles, once airborne, act as seeds around which water can gather. As the sun warms the canopy, water evaporates from leaves and soil, adding moisture to the air. This moisture mixes with the particles from the trees, and slowly, clouds begin to take shape. The very act of a forest being alive makes the sky heavier, softer, ready for rain. The Amazon, where the forest stretches wider than some nations, scientists have found that trees summon their own weather. During the dry season, when rain is scarce, the forest itself generates clouds. Trees release moisture and aerosols that help initiate cloud formation. These clouds reflect sunlight, cooling the forest. Eventually, they may gather enough water to rain, feeding the trees that made them. It is a cycle of reciprocity. The forest gives rise to clouds, and the clouds give rain to the forest. In this dance, carbon is both guest and guide. Carbon moves within this story, not as structure or soil, but as vapor and warmth. The carbon dioxide released by the forest through respiration, decay, or fire affects how much heat is trapped near the surface. This heat lifts air upward, driving circulation, drawing in moist air from elsewhere. And so even carbon in its airborne form helps shape the wind, the clouds, the path of rain. It is not separate from weather. It is part of it. But the forest's role is more than chemical. It is architectural. The structure of trees, their height, their spacing, the texture of their leaves determines how air flows across the land. A dense canopy traps humidity. A varied forest with tall emergent trees and shaded understories creates gradients of temperature and pressure. These gradients help lift air, help move clouds inland, help pull the rain away from the sea and into the heart of the land. Without forests, the clouds wander differently. The rain forgets where to fall. Tropical regions, this interplay is especially strong. Forests near the equator feed clouds that eventually drift across continents. In Africa, rainforests in the Congo help generate monsoon rains in the Sahel. In South America, the Amazon's moisture travels westward, rising over the Andes and falling again in Bolivia, Peru, and beyond. This movement of vapor is called a flying river. It carries the breath of the forest across thousands of kilometers. Cut the trees, and the river weakens. The clouds thin, the rains grow erratic. And even in temperate zones, where forests are smaller and more fragmented, the connection remains. Trees still release moisture, still shape microclimates, still help summon clouds that cool summer heat and soften winter skis. Urban forests, small as they may be, lift humidity into the air. Parks and tree-lined streets offer shade and dew that rise in morning sun. Even a single tree, sweating in the heat, sends water skyward, and the sky, listening, begins to form its soft reply. There is poetry in knowing that clouds may begin in soil, that what we walk on, the damp earth beneath our steps, might one day rise and float and drift, that a raindrop falling on your shoulder may have passed through 1,000 leaves, that each misty morning might be the forest's breath returned in vapor, that clouds are not only the gift of oceans, but the memory of land. But there is also fragility. As forests shrink, so too does the sky's softness. Without trees, less moisture rises. Fewer particles exist for clouds to form. The sun beats down harder, the air dries, the feedback is quick. More heat leads to more dryness. More dryness leads to stressed trees. Stressed trees release less moisture. The clouds become rare visitors. The rain becomes uncertain. This is how deforestation can change a region's climate, not just in temperature but in sky, not just in the absence of green but in the absence of gray. Scientists have observed that large-scale tree loss leads to reduced rainfall, increased drought, and even altered jet stream patterns. What happens on the ground echoes upward. The sky listens closely to the forest, and when the forest falls silent, the sky forgets how to rain. But the reverse is also true. Reforestation can invite clouds home again. In areas where trees have returned through natural regrowth or careful planting, the air grows moister. Rain returns, the soil recovers, the feedback loops soften, the balance begins to tip toward healing. Forests do not just capture carbon, they call rain, and rain helps them store more carbon. It is a spiral of renewal if allowed to continue. So the next time you see clouds gathering above a distant hill, know that they may be carrying more than rain. They may be holding the breath of trees, the shimmer of leaves, the scent of bark and blossom. They may be shaped by a forest you will never see, and in their falling, they may offer water to a seed that will one day rise into a tree of its own. The connection between sky and land is older than memory. The clouds remember forests, and forests in turn remember clouds. It is in this quiet conversation between leaf and vapor, between root and air, that life sustains itself, not through force but through presence. Not through command, but through continuity. And in that knowing, we begin to see rain not as weather, but as relationship, as something that must be earned, invited, kept close through care. Let us drift now with the clouds as they travel slowly above the forest canopy, their bellies heavy with moisture, their edges glowing with light. These are not aimless wanderers. They are drawn by warmth, by scent, by the invisible breath of leaves. The forest below, in all its complexity, does not simply wait for rain, it helps create it. And in doing so, it reshapes the air, the temperature, the wind. Clouds that gather over forests carry the memory of roots, the chemistry of bark, the rhythm of cycles that stretch back millions of years. The science behind this begins with something simple: transpiration. Trees, like all plants, lose water through their leaves, but forests, with their vast networks of greenery, amplify this process into something powerful. In tropical regions, up to 80% of rainfall comes from this recycled moisture. Each tree acts like a fountain, drawing water from deep underground and releasing it into the air above. And this moisture, rising invisibly, becomes the fabric from which clouds are sewn. But moisture alone is not enough. For clouds to form, the atmosphere also needs tiny particles called cloud condensation nuclei, microscopic bits of salt, dust, or organic matter around which water droplets can gather. Trees release these as well, through the emission of compounds like isoprene and monoterpenes, the same chemicals that give forests their smell after rain. Forests seed the sky. These particles rise with the moisture, attracting water, building droplets, thickening the clouds. Without them, the sky remains empty, blue, dry. This is why deforestation is more than just a loss of trees. It is a disruption of cloud making. In areas where forests are removed, the land dries, the clouds thin, and the rains become irregular. Studies in the Amazon have shown that clear-cut areas receive significantly less rainfall than surrounding intact forests. The loss of canopy leads to hotter surfaces, increased evaporation from soil instead of leaves, and reduced humidity. The very system that once sustained its own water is broken. And yet forests remember how to heal. In regions where trees are allowed to regrow, even slowly, the microclimate begins to shift. Air cools, moisture builds, cloud patterns change. Within years, new cycles of rain can emerge, not identical to those before, but familiar, functional, hopeful. This memory is not written in stone, but in feedback loops, in flows, in breath. Trees in temperate forests also play their part. Though cooler and more seasonal than the tropics, these forests contribute to local and regional rainfall by modulating temperature and humidity. In spring, as leaves unfurl, the land begins to exhale. By summer, the forest becomes a sponge of vapor. Storms may gather at its edges, drawn by the contrast between hot open fields and cool forest cores. And in autumn, as the leaves fall, the forest prepares for rest, but not before it has shaped months of weather above. Beyond the physical, there is a sensory layer to this interaction: the scent of petrichor, the smell of ozone before a storm, the way the forest air thickens just before rain. These are not illusions. They are signatures, clues from the atmosphere that it is listening to the land. Rain, in this sense, becomes a kind of reply, the sky answering the ground. We are only beginning to understand how deeply forests shape clouds, not only locally, but globally. New research suggests that large forest systems like the Amazon and the Congo Basin influence distant weather patterns by altering the flow of atmospheric rivers, massive bands of moist air that transport water across continents. A change in forest cover in one region can alter rainfall thousands of miles away. The climate is not local, it is shared. And still, the most immediate impacts remain felt where roots meet rain. In communities that rely on forests for water, food, and shade, the connection is direct. When the trees are cleared, the rains slow, crops fail, wells run dry, streams shrink. This is not just about biodiversity. It is about survival, about children growing thirsty, about seasons becoming strangers, about a future that becomes less predictable, more fragile. Yet in these same communities, solutions rise. Agroforestry, the blending of trees with crops, helps restore cloud interactions. Trees planted among food crops shade the soil, reduce evaporation, and raise local humidity. They anchor water in the land, making moisture available for plants and the sky alike. This practice, ancient in many cultures, brings the clouds back. In cities, green infrastructure, such as tree-lined boulevards, rooftop gardens, and vertical forests, add small pulses of moisture to the urban air. While no single sapling can call rain, together they cool neighborhoods, filter particulates, and influence air flow. Even a city built from stone and glass can soften under the touch of leaves. Clouds respond to warmth, to vapor, to chemistry. And we can offer all three. Clouds are not static, they are memory in motion. They carry the signals of what lies below, of what was lost, what remains, what might return. And as they pass over us, they ask quietly, what are you feeding the sky? What breath have you offered? What balance have you helped restore? The answer need not be grand. It may be a tree planted, a patch of forest left to grow wild, a practice changed, a habit softened, a respect renewed. The sky does not demand perfection, only presence, only partnership. Because every time a cloud is formed above a forest, a story is told, of cycles honored, of rhythms kept, of breath exchanged. The cloud remembers where it came from. It remembers the green that called it upward. And when it releases its rain, it writes its gratitude across the land. In this way, clouds are the sky's thank you, a returning gift for all that forests give. And when we understand this, we begin to walk differently beneath them. We look upward not with indifference, but with recognition. The clouds are not strangers. They are kin, shaped by the land, shaped by us. Let us watch, one last time, as the clouds drift slowly across the sky, soft and slow, like breath held in cupped hands. They hover above forests, above rivers, above the memory of green, carrying not only moisture but meaning. These clouds are not accidents of weather. They are the sky's response to the earth's whisper. And in their form, in their rhythm, in their rain, they offer something rare and real, a quiet reminder that even the air above is shaped by the life below. Rain begins not with thunder but with warmth, with the heat that rises from sunlit leaves, with the vapor that curls invisibly from soil and bark and bloom. And within that vapor is a trace of everything: the chemistry of a flower, the scent of resin, the breath of animals moving between trees. It rises slowly, gently, until it meets the cooler air above. There it condenses, not randomly, but around particles born of forests, microscopic seeds of bark and pollen, of dust and decay. These become the centers of raindrops, the starting points of storms, the reason clouds take form at all. And so every drop that falls carries with it a history, not of fire or lightning, but of roots, of forests that gave the sky its shimmer, of trees that built the air's softness, of green breath turned gray mist. When we feel rain on our skin, we feel the return of something old, a cycle continuing, a conversation answered. In regions where forests remain intact, this dialogue between land and sky continues with ease. Moisture rises, clouds form, rain falls, and the forest is fed. The system is self-sustaining. But when forests are broken, when vast stretches are cleared and paved and burned, the sky stutters. The clouds become scattered. Rain, once steady, arrives in bursts or not at all. The rhythm falters. This is not abstract. In places like Southeast Asia and parts of South America, deforestation has led to prolonged droughts. Croplands suffer, rivers shrink. Forest fragments left alone struggle to maintain the feedback loop that once sustained the sky. The damage moves in circles. Less forest means fewer clouds mean less rain means drier soil, and dry soil means fewer trees. The spiral is swift and the recovery slow. But not impossible. Forests can return, and when they do, so can the clouds. Reforested areas over time begin to rebuild their relationship with the air above. Young trees begin to release moisture. The air begins to cool. Clouds return tentatively at first, scattered, small, but with each year the system strengthens. More shade, more roots, more vapor, and eventually more rain. Restoring this balance does not require grand gestures. It begins with intention: a patch of land left wild, a hillside replanted, a community garden where trees are given space to grow. Each green patch is a small lung, a small source of sky-making power. And the more such spaces exist, the more the atmosphere begins to respond. Clouds are not loyal to borders. They do not pause at property lines. They travel where the conditions guide them. When forests are scattered, the clouds are too. But when green stretches across regions, even when fragmented, the atmosphere begins to stitch them together. A rainfall in one valley may be fed by evaporation from a distant grove. A storm may form not because of a single forest, but because of a network of moisture rising from many places. We often speak of rain as a gift, but perhaps it is more accurate to say it is a mirror. It reflects the state of the land it falls upon. It reflects how much care we have given the soil, the trees, the roots, and it reflects how much we have taken without return. When the rain comes less often, it is not only the weather changing, it is the land asking for help. There are efforts now to use cloud seeding, to artificially enhance rainfall by adding particles to the atmosphere. But these are only temporary solutions. The natural feedback loop between forests and clouds is more elegant, more lasting. Where the land is healthy, the sky responds without coercion. And where it is not, no amount of technology can fully replace what trees do with ease. Education plays a role in this understanding, teaching the next generation that clouds are not random, that they are linked to roots, to cycles, to choices, that the rain on the window might once have been part of a leaf, that their actions, their planting, their protecting, ripple upward into the sky. Even culture remembers this. Many indigenous traditions speak of clouds as living beings, as spirits of the air. They are not passive but aware, not empty but full of meaning. And though science uses different words, the truth remains. Clouds respond to care. They are shaped by the world we create below. In this light, stewardship becomes not just about the land, but about the weather, about the skis we leave for the future, about whether tomorrow's rain will be regular or rare, and whether the clouds will carry the memory of forests or forget them altogether. So let us choose to be remembered in the rain. Let the clouds that pass above carry the breath of healthy forests. Let the air shimmer with moisture not from machines but from leaves. Let the rhythms of sky and soil remain connected, undisturbed, alive. Because when the last cloud drifts past, when the sun breaks through and the earth begins to dry, what remains is not only the water but the story. The story of a world where rain still listens, where forests still speak, where balance, though delicate, is still possible. And as that last drop falls, soft against bark, against skin, against the surface of a quiet pond, we might look up and know, the clouds remember. And because they do, so must we.